This is a short lecture introduction to the book of Zephaniah, a book that talks about the day of the Lord and sees the day of the Lord in Babylon's invasion of 586 BC, and also looks to an end times day of the Lord. My name is Dr. Joe Sprinkle. A little bit about the author of Zephaniah. Verse 1 says, "The word of the Lord that came to Zephaniah, the son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, the son of Amariah, the son of Hezekiah, during the reigns of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah." This says several things about the author. Zephaniah was of royal descent. He was a descendant of King Hezekiah. Interesting also is that he is said to be the son of Cushi. Cushi seems to relate to Cush, which is Ethiopia, which is actually mentioned in chapter 2 and verse 12 and chapter 3 and verse 10. And Cushi, as a Hebrew word, would mean Ethiopian. And so it may be that Zephaniah had an Ethiopian mother along the way, perhaps through marriage alliance, married into the royal family. But this Ethiopian connection helps to explain Zephaniah's interest in and recording of prophecies about Cush, or Ethiopia, in chapter 2, verse 12, and chapter 3 and verse 10. It also says that he was active during the reign of Josiah, who was king from roughly 640 to 609 BC. Now, one of the issues is how to relate Zephaniah's prophecy to a major event that happened in Josiah's reign, the discovery of the law of the Lord in the temple. Scholars debate as to whether Zephaniah dates to before or after Josiah's reforms of 621 BC, which he introduced as a result of discovering this long-forgotten law of the Lord, which appears to be Deuteronomy, in the temple. I lean to a date before 621 BC because after his reforms, some of the lawlessness described would not have occurred, presumably. There are a number of sins addressed by the book of Zephaniah. One of the complaints is that people had no fear of God, chapter 1 and verse 12. "And I will punish the men who say in their hearts, the Lord will not do good or evil." They don't think God does much of anything, so they can just live as they wish. Another sin, pride and disrespect for the temple, chapter 3 and 11. "In that day I will remove from your midst your proud, exalting ones, and you will never again be haughty on my holy mountain." There is also fraud and ill-gotten gain, chapter 1 and verse 9. People who fill the house of their Lord with violence and deceit. And then there was the worship of Baal and planetary deities in chapter 1, 4 and 5, and also verse 9. "I will cut off the remnant of Baal from this place, and the names of the idolatrous priests along with the priests, and those who bow down on the rooftops to the host of heaven, and those who bow down and swear to the Lord, and yet swear by Milcom." There is also corrupt civil and religious leaders, chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. "Her princes within her are roaring lions. Her judges are wolves at evening. They leave nothing for the morning. Her prophets are reckless, treacherous men. Her priests have profaned the sanctuary. They have done violence to the law." Well, the book of Zephaniah is going to give God's response to these sins, and the response is that God is going to send the day of the Lord in judgment. And that day of the Lord is against Judah in chapter 1, verse 2 through chapter 2 and verse 3. And then it's against the various nations in the rest of chapter 2, the nations including the Philistines, Moab, Ammon, Cush, and Assyria. And then it's against Jerusalem in particular in chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. That's the day of the Lord in judgment. But then the last part of the book has a different kind of day of the Lord, the day of joy beyond the judgment. Chapter 3, verse 9 through 20. Now, note these 2 days of the Lord in Zephaniah, the immediate day of the Lord. The immediate day of the Lord would come from judgment via the Babylonians, especially in 586 BC when they destroyed Jerusalem. But then the future day, described in the last part of the book, has an eschatological promise that relates to the Messianic age. You might notice how this day of the Lord broadens both in geography and chronology throughout the book. It begins with the day of the Lord on Judah, which is fulfilled in 586 for their various sins, but then it expands geographically to the day of the Lord on the nations in chapter 2, but then in chapter 3 it broadens to eschatology, the end times. So let's look at some passages in Zephaniah. First of all, verses 2 through 6. I will completely remove all things from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. I will remove man and beast. I will remove the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea and the ruins along with the wicked. I will cut off man from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. So I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and I will cut off the remnant of Baal from this place, and the names of the idolatrous priests along with the priests, and those who bow down on the housetops to the host of heaven, and those that bow down and swear to the Lord, and yet swear by Milcom, and those that have turned back from following the Lord, and those who have not sought the Lord are inquired of him. It begins with this universal language. I will remove all things from the face of the earth. Though this is hyperbole, the focus is actually on Judah and Jerusalem. And so I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And again, that's fulfilled actually in 2 ways: in 598 BC when Jerusalem is besieged by Babylon, and then 586 BC when it was not only besieged but also destroyed by Babylon. Zephaniah 1 verses 14 through 16. Near is the day of the Lord, near and coming very quickly. Listen, the day of the Lord. In it the warrior cries out bitterly. A day of wrath is that day, a day of trouble and distress, a day of destruction and desolation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of trumpet and battle cry against the fortified cities and the high corner towers. Here it describes the day of the Lord. And again, this is a temporal day of the Lord having to do with the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem in 586. But then in chapter 2, it says this, Zephaniah 2, 1 through 3. Gather yourselves together, yes, gather, O nation without shame, before the decree takes effect. The day passes like the chaff. Before the burning anger of the Lord comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger comes upon you, seek the Lord, all you humble of the earth, who have carried out his ordinances. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. This is a call to repentance, to do something before the judgment falls. It's not an unconditional promise. Perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. It's not an unconditional promise, but it does supply hope that it is possible with repentance to avert the judgment that is to come. And I would argue that because of Josiah's reforms, it didn't totally avert the judgment, but it delayed it until after his death in 609. This, perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger, may relate to Zephaniah's name, which means God has hidden or God has protected. The eschatological day of the Lord is in chapter 3, verses 9 through 12. For then I will give the peoples purified lips, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord, to serve him shoulder to shoulder. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, the Hebrew word is Cush, my worshippers, my dispersed ones, will bring my offerings. In that day you will feel no shame because of all your deeds, by which you have rebelled against me. For then I will remove from your midst your proud, exalting ones, and you will never again be haughty on my holy mountain. I will leave among you a humble and lowly people, and they will take refuge in the name of the Lord. Now, this is a hope beyond the gloom passage, referring to the distant future. God is not only going to purify the Jewish people, he's also going to give other peoples, notice the plural, purified lips, beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. That's Cush. And remember, Zephaniah is descendant of a man named Cushi, which means Ethiopian. This seems to be fulfilled in the Messianic age, when Gentiles, along with Jews, would have purified lips as a result of the gospel going out to them. And so this has been partially fulfilled in the church age, in my opinion, with the gospel going out throughout the world, including Ethiopia. But it's partly awaits the second coming of Christ to be fully fulfilled in the millennium. So that's an introduction to the book of Zephaniah, and my name is Dr. Joe Sprinkle.